I've often been criticised for speaking of the Jesuits and the Illuminati in the same breath, but they are one and the same indeed. With the Jesuit suppression in 1773, the Jesuit order, the Superior General of the Jesuit order, also known as the Black Pope, Lorenzo Ricci, created the Bavarian Illuminati as an organization by which the Jesuits could continue their nefarious business without necessarily being bothered by the fact that they'd been suppressed officially, and indeed through the Illuminati they could continue. Lorenzo Ricci found a Jesuit-trained professor of Catholic canon law at a Jesuit university in Ingolstadt, in Jesuit stronghold Bavaria, called Adam Weishaupt. The fact that this man was chosen to head the Illuminati, Jesuit-trained, a professor of Catholic canon law at a Jesuit university in a Jesuit stronghold town, is that not enough proof the Jesuits in the Illuminati are one? And indeed, before the Borgia family brought the Jesuits forth and they were sanctified by papal bull, the Jesuits were known as Los Alumbrados. What does Los Alumbrados mean? It means the illuminated, the Illuminati. Thus, the Jesuits have always been the Illuminati. And when people speak about the Illuminati today in random conversation, because it's come into normal conspiracy speak, the term Illuminati, they don't realize that they are actually speaking about the Jesuits. They think they're speaking about a specific group that are controlling the world, and indeed they are, but they don't realize that they are speaking about the Sons of Loyola. They are speaking about the Jesuit order. And the Jesuits were restored in 1814, thus the term Illuminati effectively became redundant, but indeed it needn't be, because the Jesuits, before they were the Jesuits, were the Illuminati, and during their suppression they were the Illuminati. So the term Illuminati and the Jesuits are interchangeable, so you can use them as much as you like. When you're speaking of the Illuminati, you're actually speaking of the Jesuits, but you're also speaking of the Illuminati at the same time. But the Illuminati are the Jesuits. Thus, there is no distinction. Speak of them how you will. Use the term Illuminati if you wish. I know what you're talking about. Some fool who's new to conspiracy may think you're just speaking about Rothschild and Rockefeller. But indeed, there is some truth to that, because the early Weishauptian Illuminati did ally themselves with the House of Rothschild because they needed bankers that weren't Catholic, because they'd been suppressed by the Catholic Church. They needed to put their money that they'd gathered during the rather lucrative for the Jesuits, the Paraguayan reductions, they needed to store them with bankers that weren't Catholic. Thus, the House of Rothschild were chosen to be the bankers of the Jesuit order. And indeed, by 1823 they became the treasurers for the entire Vatican, but by 1823 the Vatican had already been completely controlled by the Jesuits for 9 years, since 1814, even though it took 5 years of imprisonment of Pope Pius VII to give the Jesuits back their title, and every pope since Pope Pius VII has been a puppet of the Jesuit order, and thus you could say that every pope since 1814 has been a member of the Illuminati. Indeed, everyone in the papacy, from Archbishop up, is initiated into the Illuminati. Thus, the hierarchy, the higher areas of the Catholic Church, you could also use the term Illuminati to describe them. And indeed, what we see in this Dan Brown Da Vinci Code business is an attempt to separate Catholicism and the Illuminati. And this is propaganda to take you away from the truth. This is disinformation that the Jesuits themselves are putting out there to create an idea among the public that the Illuminati are distinct from the Jesuit order when they are not. Thus, these people who have been getting at me for talking about the Jesuits and the Illuminati in the same breath are the very same people that have fallen for the disinformationism that has been being put out there by the Jesuits to believe that the Illuminati and the Jesuits are not one and the same when they are. And furthermore, at the 1782 Congress of Wilhelmsbad, the Illuminati took over much of Freemasonry, so much of Freemasonry is also part of the Jesuit sphere. Not all of Scottish Rite Freemasonry is part of the Jesuit sphere, but the head of Scottish Rite Freemasonry is the same person, the Black Pope, who is the head of the Jesuit order, so it all links back in. The Jesuits are the arch conspirators, but do we want to call them the Jesuits? We could call them the Jesuits, or the Illuminati, or los Alumbrados. You can use any of those terms to describe them, and they are the major force in global politics, the strategists. Indeed, they are the CIA of the ultra-aristocracy, and much of the ultra-aristocracy are high-level Jesuits. Thus, the linking in terms of the global conspiracy is huge, and the Jesuits are pivotal. And I'm not going to lie, I went down the Rothschilds rule the world and Zionism routes. I went down the wrong rabbit holes for several years before I came across a handful of anti-Jesuit scholars. There are no more than 10 of us who are really aware of the subject. Indeed, we are considered to be the crank element of the crank element of the crank element of the conspiracy theory world. But that is only because we are the only ones in the truth, and we are the alternative, the alternative, the alternative, the alternative. If you want to go left-wing, become New Age, you're being ensnared. You're accidentally becoming depopulationists. If you want to go right, become part of Alex Jones, you're accidentally, gradually driving a right-wing drive towards fascism. All of it is disinformation, and indeed, a lot of the alternative media was created by Frederick Copplestone, S.J., a member of the Jesuits, to confuse you. And indeed, the New Age movement was created by a Jesuit, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, S.J., New Age movement. And indeed, those who would like to distance the Illuminati, Freemasonry, and Jesuitry from each other try and do so by speaking of, for instance, Albert Pike and Mazzini, but Albert Pike was not only overseen by Jean-Pierre de Smet, S.J., a high-ranking Jesuit. Albert Pike was himself a Jesuit priest. Just therefore, the Palladians, the Illuminati, as it were, of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, are Jesuitical themselves. And indeed, British intelligence has always been run, for the last 300 years, British intelligence, MI6, MI5, Proto-MI6, Proto-MI5, have been controlled by the Shelburne Petty family, now Petty Fitzmaurice, who own Bowood House. And that dynasty have always been Jesuits, reaching back 400, 500 years, and they've been in control of British intelligence for 300 years. Thus, even MI6 are basically the Jesuit order, and the Breakspear family are one of the only Anglo-Norman high Jesuit papal family, the Breakspears, and they have a lot of influence over the British royalty and Scottish Rite Freemasonry. And as I said, the Petty Fitzmaurice family, as they are now, control MI6. The MI6 war rooms are beneath Bowood House, and there are a warren of tunnels all over Wiltshire which the Jesuits used during their colonisation and were previously used by the Catholic and Jesuit dynasties such as the Shelburnes, the Cecils. The Cecils remained Protestant, but because of their marriage to the Pallavicinis, they were Jesuits, and they were Protestant Jesuits. And the Percy family and the Welds and the Calverts and the Howards, all of these families utilise these tunnels that run from Bowood House to Laycock Abbey to Porton Down, most especially to Hatfield House, the home of the Cecils in Hampshire, probably to Salisbury Cathedral. These tunnels were used initially as priest holes and monk tunnels when Catholicism was basically banished from the land, during the period of Queen Elizabeth I, but interestingly, Queen Elizabeth I's war with Spain was financed by a Jesuit family, the Pallavicinis, married to the Cecils. The Jesuits financed the Protestants against the Catholics. So, therefore, the Jesuits were doing what they liked. They were the Illuminati. They weren't just an offshoot of the Catholic Church. They were rogue, just as the CIA and MI6 act rogue now. They're the same concept. And indeed, what the Bavarian Illuminati was, indeed, Weishaupt was practically tasked with reviving the Alumbrados as they were in their raw form before they became part of the Catholic Church. As when they became the Jesuit order, they became the military monks of the Catholic Church. During their time as Los Alumbrados, in their pure form, they had their own view, their own direction of world domination, and it was that Alumbrados direction of world domination that came to fore with the philosophy of Weishaupt. And that was why the Sabbatean Frankists fit in so easily, because the philosophies of Jacob Frank in terms of world domination were very similar to Weishaupt, who was recreating Los Alumbrados and the pure form of the Illuminati. This is the Illuminati. It dates back, it goes, what we know as the Jesuit order, it dates back through Los Alumbrados, through the order of the Montesa, through the order of the Calatrava, back to the Templars, and in a different way, through the Scottish Rite Freemasonry, through the Sinclair family, back to the Templars. In Germany, through the Rosicrucians, the Rosy Cross, back to the Templars. Even with the Knights of Malta, they were given the lands and holdings of the Templars when Jacques de Molay and the Templars were suppressed by the Pope in the similar way to the Jesuit order, where their lands were given to the Knights of Malta. But what is the emblem of the Knights of Malta? It's the Rosy Cross, very similar to the Rosicrucians and to the Templars. Even if you look at the Ku Klux Klan, who Jesuit Grand Master Albert Pike had many dealings with, indeed he was a Grand Wizard, or Grand Cyclops, or one of those silly names the KKK use. Look at the emblem of the KKK, it's the Rosy Cross, it's the Templar Cross. And we keep seeing it popping up. Skull and Bones, all of these different societies, we could consider this an umbrella. It is the Illuminati, but the center of the Illuminati is the Jesuits. The Jesuits, the Bavarian Illuminati of Weishaupt and Los Alumbrados, the proto-Jesuit Jesuits. So the Jesuit order really all gestates around them and what we call the Black Papacy. The Black Pope right now is Arturo Sosa. The White Pope is Pope Francis. Interestingly, as I've mentioned, every Pope since 1814, since Pope Pius VII, has been a Jesuit puppet. But this particular priest, Pope Francis, who is in the Vatican now, he is actually a Jesuit. He is the first Jesuit Pope. But behind the White Pope is the Black Pope, who is Arturo Sosa. And then you also have the Grey Pope, who right now is Pepe Orsini. And what we call the Grey Jesuit families are the Grey Jesuit papal bloodlines, the Orsinis, Aldobrandinis, Colonnas, Torlonias, Medicis, Farneses, Samaglias, Breakspear, Conti, Chigi, Este, Massimo. I may have left out a couple, but can never remember all of them, but I have it all written down. But indeed, those are what we like to call the Grey Jesuit family. Indeed, there is the council of the great high Grey Jesuits. The elders of the Grey Jesuits are the ones who pretty much make the decisions. But the Black Pope also attends the gatherings of the Grey Jesuit meetings, and this is what could really be termed as the center of Illuminism, of the Illuminati. This is the group that makes the decisions. The Vatican now is simply, could be seen as ceremonial, but it is also advancing the world domination agenda as put forth by Los Alumbrados. What happened was, the Jesuits put their world domination theories aside for a while they did their oaths for the Pope. The Counter-Reformation, the Council of Trent, to enforce the Council of Trent, and to bring the thrones of Europe back to the papacy. They'd achieved this by 1814 with the Congress of Vienna. Not only this, they'd also become the papacy. They'd taken over the papacy. And by 1870, they introduced papal infallibility. And with papal infallibility, all of the popes were not only Jesuit puppets, but everything they said what was decree was truth, God-given truth. So the Jesuits could mediate from the grey pope to the black pope into the white pope, who is the figurehead like Pope Francis right now, and get them to say exactly what they want. And because of infallibility, it's considered God's word. So the Jesuits have a mouthpiece as the white pope. Pope Francis he is the mouthpiece for the Jesuit order. Pope John Paul I revolted against it. That's why he was murdered. And indeed, what is most important is this grey Jesuit papal bloodline, the oligarchy I mentioned before, with the Aldobrandinis, Farneses, Borgias, Medicis, etc. There was a marriage in 1545 between that part of the ultra-aristocracy and the Cecil family. Thus, and ever since the Jesuit colonization, which was legitimized in the Jesuit mind by the concessions of King John to Pope Innocent XIII, of giving all of Britain's land holdings and corporations and throne it to Pope Innocent III in 1213 and 1215. The Jesuit colonization of Britain from 1773 to 1815 was legitimized using that fact that Britain had been a papal fief since 1213 and 1215, since the concessions that King John made, and that also linked to Jesuit control of America. But with the colonization, the Aldobrandinis, Estes, Farneses, these grey Jesuit families, the Genoese, you may call them, began to intermarry with the British aristocracy, and thus this creates the ultra-aristocracy. And we suddenly have ideas coming out of Britain such as Malthusianism, Darwinism, and Galton, Darwin's cousin, Thomas Henry Huxley, eugenics. And indeed, the ultra-aristocracy, the Aldobrandinis, Estes, Chigis, etc., had always been practicing genetic engineering and selective breeding. And they legitimized it through papal infallibility, the idea of the divine right of aristocracy to rule. They had a religious basis. But now, with the British aristocracy rising, the British aristocracy were using evolution and eugenics. And now they had a scientific basis to support the same theories. So we have Malthus, eugenics and evolution, mixing with Ultra-Catholicism, the divine right of the aristocracy, and papal infallibility. Thus, the aristocracy have managed to create their own ethnic group, basically, and it is this group, with the Jesuits at the helm, who are forcing the way into the New World Order. It may be said that the Black Pope is the center of it all, but perhaps the Grey Pope. But it's these two unique aristocracies, this more ultra-Catholic, divine right one, married to Darwinism, eugenics and evolution in the British aristocracy, the Norman British aristocracy. And so we have figures like Malthus, who were able to bridge religion. He was a clergyman. They're able to bridge religion and science. And then the French ultra-aristocrat Gobineau, who came up with the idea of the master race, the aristocratic master race that must rule the world. And indeed, this group, they fashioned themselves on the old Sumerian Anunnaki Grand Council, and they believe that feudalism is the only system for mankind, and the divine right, rule of the aristocracy, backed up by eugenics, genetic engineering and selective breeding. So it's a marriage of all the ideas. So the Catholic Church, the hierarchy, which are part of the Illuminati, are quite happy for technocracy to become as vast as it can, because it suits their aims. They're happy for evolution to be taught. They're happy for eugenics to occur, even though it goes against scripture. But they are able to pass it off by saying, but we have a divine right to rule. Their papal infallibility, you cannot question what we say. And We have the divine right to rule, as we are the aristocracy. Thus, it all comes together, and this is the theory which is going into the New World Order. We are to be the serfs in a feudal system, and indeed the Jesuits practiced ready for it with their Paraguayan reductions, which I've explained often, and also their experiments with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was a Jesuit experiment. But what really happened, as I said, the Jesuits forgot their initial Alumbrados world plan for domination when they became the papal CIA, basically, and by 1814 they'd completed that oath. So since 1814, and with Weishaupt and the Illuminati rising, they have been able to return to their initial plan of world domination that they were planning during the 1490s, 1510s, 1520s, before 1534, when they came out of the lodges, having been found by the Borgias. So it's all linked. They all link in together, and that's basically everything explained as best I could in one go. The Illuminati, the Jesuits, the Alumbrados are all one, and they all desire world domination in a feudal order, with themselves as the aristocracy and all of us as the serfs. Now I'm going to fade out.